Lucy had always known that her stepmother, Linda, was controlling, but she never thought it would come to this. From the moment she got engaged to Jake, she had anticipated some resistance. Linda had never truly accepted her as part of the family. Ever since she married Lucy's father, Richard, when Lucy was in her early 20s, Linda had made it clear that she saw Lucy as competition rather than family. At first, Lucy tried to ignore the small slights, the passive-aggressive comments at family dinners, the way Linda always positioned herself between Lucy and her father, how she conveniently forgot to invite Lucy to family gatherings. But this was on a whole new level. Lucy had been waiting for a response from her father about the wedding for weeks. The invitations had been sent, RSVPs had started rolling in, and she was excitedly planning the final details. But there was no word from him, no call, no text, nothing. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe he was just busy, or maybe he assumed she already knew he was coming. Still, something about the silence gnawed at her. Her father wasn't the type to ignore important events, and she refused to believe he had simply forgotten. One evening, she finally picked up the phone and dialed his number. It rang a few times before he answered. "Lucy," he said, his voice cautious. "Hey, Dad," she said, forcing a lightness into her tone. "I just wanted to check in. I haven't heard from you about the wedding, and I wanted to make sure you got your invitation." There was a long pause. Too long. "Dad," she prompted. He cleared his throat. "I didn't get one." Lucy's stomach twisted. "What do you mean you didn't get one? We sent it weeks ago." Another pause. Then, quietly, he said, "Linda handles the mail." Lucy felt a rush of cold anger. Of course. "So you're saying Linda must have seen it?" Well, I don't know," he said weakly. "Maybe it got lost." Lucy closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Dad, you and I both know that invitation didn't just disappear. Linda saw it, and she didn't give it to you." There was a shuffling sound on the other end, as if he had turned away from the phone. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "I think it's best if you talk to her directly." Lucy's grip on her phone tightened. "Fine, I will." She didn't even hesitate before hanging up and calling Linda immediately. The phone barely rang before her stepmother answered. "Lucy," Linda said, her tone as smooth as ever. "What a surprise." "Cut the act, Linda," Lucy snapped. "Where is my dad's wedding invitation?" A beat of silence. Then, with a smirk in her voice, Linda said, "Oh, that. I didn't think it was necessary for him to have it." Lucy's heart pounded in her chest. "Excuse me?" "Lucy, let's be realistic," Linda continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This wedding, it's not exactly something your father should be attending. You know how complicated things have been between you two." Lucy felt like she had been slapped. "Complicated?" she repeated. "My dad and I have a great relationship. When you're not interfering." Linda let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, honey, you think that, but he and I have had many conversations about this. He's not as sure about going as you might believe." Lucy's blood boiled. "That's funny, because he didn't even know he was invited until I told him just now." There was a brief pause, then Linda said, "Well, I saved him the trouble of making a difficult decision." "That wasn't your decision to make," Lucy practically yelled. "This is my wedding. My father should be there." Linda sighed dramatically. "Lucy, you always take everything so personally. I was only looking out for him. Your wedding is going to be stressful for him. You and Jake have been so distant from the family, and honestly, I don't think it would be good for him to be there. Too much tension." Lucy was shaking with anger. "Tension that you create, Linda? You've spent years trying to push me out of my father's life, and I let it slide because I didn't want to fight. But this is too far." Linda didn't even sound remotely fazed. "Your father agrees with me," she said smugly. Lucy froze. "What?" "He agrees with me," Linda repeated, her tone light, almost playful. He doesn't think it's the best idea for him to be at your wedding. We talked about it, and he sees my point." Lucy felt something inside her crack. "You manipulated him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Linda gave a short laugh. "Oh, Lucy, always playing the victim." Lucy couldn't listen anymore. She hung up without another word, her hands trembling. She immediately called her father back. This time it took several rings before he answered. "Dad," she said, her voice breaking, "tell me it's not true." There was a long silence before he finally said, "Lucy, I just don't want there to be drama on your big day." Her breath caught. "Drama? Dad, the only drama is coming from Linda. She's the one keeping you from me, from us. She didn't even tell you about the invitation." "I know," he admitted quietly. "But she made some good points." Lucy's heart felt like it was shattering. "What points? That I'm not your daughter anymore? That I don't deserve to have my father at my wedding?" "That's not what I meant," he said. But he sounded exhausted, defeated. Lucy clenched her jaw. "Then prove it. Come to my wedding." Another pause. "I don't know, Lucy. I just don't want to cause any problems." Lucy let out a bitter laugh. "The only problem is that you're letting Linda control your life. And if you can't stand up for me now when it matters most, then maybe she's won." She didn't give him a chance to respond. She hung up and sank onto the couch, her chest tight with emotion. How had it come to this? Her father, the man who had always been there for her growing up, was now so deeply under Linda's influence that he was willing to miss his own daughter's wedding. And the worst part? Linda was enjoying every second of it. Lucy wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. No, she wasn't going to let Linda win. Lucy couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every conversation she had ever had with her father and Linda. How had it come to this? How had her own father allowed his wife to manipulate him into turning away from his only daughter? The pain sat heavy in her chest, a dull ache that refused to fade. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. This was about years of slow, calculated isolation. About Linda chipping away at her father's love for her piece by piece, until he hardly resembled the man who had once been her protector, her biggest supporter. The next morning, Lucy decided she needed answers. If her father wouldn't tell her the truth, she would find it herself. She made a list of every family member who had been in contact with him lately, starting with her Aunt Margaret, her father's older sister. Unlike Linda, Margaret had always been warm and loving toward Lucy. If anyone would be honest with her, it was her. Lucy called her mid-morning, pacing the length of her apartment as the phone rang. "Lucy, sweetheart," Margaret answered, her voice warm but slightly hesitant. "I was just thinking about you." Lucy's stomach twisted. "Aunt Margaret, did Linda tell you that my father and I had some kind of falling out?" There was a pause, followed by a sigh. "Oh, honey, she didn't just tell me. She's been telling everyone." Lucy gripped the phone tighter. "What exactly has she been saying?" Margaret hesitated. "She told us that you and your father had a huge fight over the wedding, that you didn't want him there because he and Linda made you uncomfortable. She said you thought it would be better if he just stayed out of it altogether." Lucy felt like the air had been sucked from the room. "That's a complete lie. I never said anything like that. I wanted my dad there. She's the one who took his invitation and told him not to come." Margaret sighed again, sounding exhausted. "I figured something wasn't right. But you know how Linda is. She's very persuasive, and your father, well, he's not the man he used to be. Ever since he married her, he's let her speak for him more and more." Lucy swallowed the lump in her throat. "So you believe me?" "Of course I do," Margaret said immediately. "But not everyone does. Some of the family thinks it's just a misunderstanding. Others, well, let's just say Linda has a way of making people doubt things. She tells her version of events so confidently that people start to believe it." Lucy closed her eyes. "Who else has she told?" "Pretty much everyone who's been invited to the wedding," Margaret admitted. Some of them are confused. Some are upset. I even heard from your cousin Rachel that Linda tried to convince her not to go, saying the wedding would be a toxic environment because of all the supposed tension between you and your dad. Lucy felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about her father anymore. Linda was actively trying to sabotage her entire wedding. Ah, thank you for telling me, Lucy said, trying to keep her voice steady. I need to fix this. Margaret hesitated. Be careful, sweetheart. Linda's good at twisting things. And your father, he's in deep. I don't think he even realizes how much control she has over him. Lucy clenched her jaw. Then, it's time he wakes up. She spent the rest of the day making calls, reaching out to family members one by one. Some were hesitant, unsure who to believe. Others had already seen through Linda's lies and reassured her that they would be at the wedding no matter what. But the damage had been done. Doubt had been planted, and Lucy knew that some people would always wonder if there was some truth to Linda's version of events. By the time evening rolled around, Lucy was exhausted but determined. She needed to confront her father in person. A phone call wouldn't be enough. She had to look him in the eye and make him see the truth. She drove to her childhood home, her heart pounding as she pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it always had, but it felt different now. Less like home, more like enemy territory. She rang the doorbell, bracing herself. Linda answered. The moment their eyes met, Lucy saw the satisfaction in Linda's expression, the smug tilt of her lips, the gleam of victory in her eyes. Lucy, she said smoothly. What a surprise. Lucy didn't waste time on pleasantries. I want to talk to my father, alone. Linda tilted her head, feigning concern. Oh, sweetheart, I don't think that's a good idea. He's been so stressed about all of this. Cut the act, Linda. Lucy pushed past her, stepping into the house. Linda's smile faltered, but she didn't stop her. Richard, dear, she called, her voice sickeningly sweet. Lucy's here to see you. Lucy's father appeared in the hallway, looking tired and uncertain. Lucy? Lucy crossed her arms. Dad, I need to talk to you. Alone. Linda moved to his side, slipping her hand into his. Richard, you don't need this kind of negativity right now. Lucy felt a surge of frustration. Negativity? Linda, I know what you've been doing. I know you took my father's invitation. I know you've been spreading lies about me to the family, and I know you've been manipulating him for years. Linda didn't even flinch. That's quite the accusation. Her father sighed. Lucy, please, I don't want to fight. Lucy turned to him, her voice pleading. Dad, this isn't a fight. This is me telling you the truth. Linda has been lying to you, twisting things. I never told you not to come to my wedding. I wanted you there. She's the one who tried to keep you away. Her father looked between them, confusion flickering across his face. Linda wouldn't do that. Lucy exhaled sharply. Think about it, Dad. Did you ever see the invitation? Did you ever actually hear me say I didn't want you there? Or have you only heard it from her? Her father hesitated. Linda laughed softly. Richard, darling, she's trying to turn you against me. You know how emotional she gets. Lucy's jaw clenched. Dad, listen to me. If you don't believe me, call Aunt Margaret. Call anyone in the family. Linda has been telling them all the same lies. Her father rubbed his forehead. I don't know what to think. Lucy felt her heart sink. Even now, faced with the truth, he was still struggling to see past Linda's influence. Linda smiled, resting a hand on his arm. Come on, Richard. Let's not do this tonight. Lucy's chest tightened. She realized then that she might never get through to him, that Linda's grip on him was too strong. She swallowed the lump in her throat. I love you, Dad, but I won't let Linda ruin my wedding. You're welcome to be there, but if you let her control you, you'll be the one missing out. With that, she turned and walked out the door, leaving Linda's smirk behind her. Lucy had always known that Linda was manipulative, but the extent of her deception was worse than she had imagined. After confronting her father and seeing the hesitation in his eyes, Lucy realized that she was fighting a battle she might never win. Linda had spent years embedding herself into his life, isolating him, and making sure that her voice was the only one he truly listened to. Now she wasn't just controlling him, she was actively trying to turn the rest of the family against Lucy. And for what? Pure spite? The days leading up to the wedding were supposed to be filled with excitement and last-minute preparations, but instead, Lucy found herself constantly putting out fires. Every day brought a new revelation, a new betrayal that made her question just how deep Linda's interference had gone. It started with a call from her cousin Rachel. "Lucy, I just wanted to check something with you," Rachel said, her voice uncertain. "I heard from Aunt Linda that you were having second thoughts about the wedding, that you weren't sure if you wanted family there at all." Lucy nearly dropped her phone. "She what?" She said you've been really stressed and thought it might be easier to just have a small ceremony with only close friends. I didn't know if I should still come." Lucy gritted her teeth. "Rachel, I never said that. Linda is lying to you, to everyone. She's trying to make people think I don't want them at my wedding." There was a pause. "Oh my God," Rachel murmured. "I thought it sounded weird." But she was so confident about it, like she was just trying to help you avoid any extra pressure. "She's not trying to help me," Lucy snapped. "She's trying to sabotage my wedding. Please, Rachel, if anyone else mentions this, let them know it's not true. You're all invited and I want you there." After Rachel's call, Lucy's phone barely stopped ringing. First, her uncle expressed his disappointment that she had supposedly excluded her father. Then her father's longtime friend called, asking why Lucy had told him she was eloping instead of having a wedding. Linda had spread so many lies, and she had done it masterfully, just subtle enough to create doubt, just believable enough that people questioned Lucy's intentions instead of hers. Lucy knew she had to act fast. She started personally reaching out to every guest, reassuring them that nothing had changed and that they were all welcome. Most of them were shocked to hear how much Linda had twisted the truth. Some admitted that they had already suspected something was off, but others had been convinced by Linda's act. The most painful part, however, was the realization that even if she managed to undo some of the damage, she couldn't erase the doubt Linda had planted in people's minds. There would always be whispers, always someone who wondered if the drama had been Lucy's fault. And worst of all, her father was still silent. A part of her wanted to call him again, to beg him to see the truth, but after their last conversation, she knew it was pointless. If he couldn't stand up for her now, when it mattered most, would he ever? Then came the worst betrayal of all. It was 2 days before the wedding when Lucy got a call from her wedding planner, Olivia. "Hey, Lucy," Olivia said carefully. "I just wanted to confirm something with you. Did you change your mind about the venue?" Lucy frowned. "What? No. Why would you ask that?" Olivia hesitated. "Because someone claiming to be your mother called earlier today and tried to cancel the entire event." Lucy's blood ran cold. "What?" "They said there had been a family emergency and that you had decided to postpone the wedding indefinitely," Olivia explained. "I thought it was strange, so I double-checked the caller ID. It came from your father's home number." Lucy felt like the room was spinning. Linda. This was beyond manipulation. This was straight-up sabotage. She wasn't just spreading rumors or trying to keep her father away. She was actively trying to destroy the wedding itself. "I need to go," Lucy said, barely getting the words out before she hung up. Her hands shook as she dialed her father's number. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Lucy," he said hesitantly. "Tell me Linda didn't just try to cancel my wedding," Lucy demanded. There was silence, a heavy, guilty silence. "Dad?" she pressed. "Did she do it?" A sigh. "Lucy, she was just trying to help." Lucy let out a bitter laugh. "Help," she lied. She pretended to be my mother and tried to cancel my entire wedding. How exactly is that helping? She thought. I don't care what she thought, Lucy snapped. I want to know if you're okay with this. Do you approve of what she did? There was another long pause. She went too far, he admitted. I told her that. Lucy swallowed hard. But you're still choosing her, aren't you? Lucy, it's not that simple. It is that simple, she interrupted. Either you're on my side or you're on hers. And if you can't even stand up to her when she's actively trying to ruin the biggest day of my life, then I don't know what else there is to say. Her father's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't want to lose you. Lucy's throat tightened. Then don't. But he didn't say anything else. Lucy hung up. And for the first time since this nightmare started, she allowed herself to cry. Not just out of anger, but out of grief. Grief for the father she had lost. Grief for the family she had always wanted, but would never have. But, as the tears dried, something inside her hardened. She might have lost her father to Linda's manipulation, but she would not let Linda win. The wedding would go on, and Linda would have no place in it. The day of Lucy's wedding arrived with a weight in her chest that she couldn't shake. The morning had been a blur. Busy with final preparations, the makeup artist and stylist working quickly to get her ready for the ceremony. Lucy was surrounded by her closest friends, her bridesmaids, all of whom had shown up despite the confusion and rumors swirling around the event. But the absence of her father weighed heavily on her heart. He hadn't called. He hadn't shown up. Linda's grip on him was more than she'd feared, and despite her best efforts, it seemed Lucy had lost him for good. She looked at herself in the mirror. The dress, the makeup, the flowers, everything was in place, but something was missing. It should have been her father standing beside her as she prepared to walk down the aisle. He should have been the one to give her away, to stand proudly at her side as she started this new chapter with Jake. Instead, she felt more alone than ever, with only the people who had chosen to stand by her remaining in her life. The wedding ceremony was set to begin in less than an hour. Lucy took a deep breath, trying to gather herself. The nerves were kicking in now, not because of the ceremony itself, but because of the gaping hole in her life. Her mother had passed away when she was a young girl, and her father had always been her rock. He had been her protector, her cheerleader, the one who had always made her feel like she could conquer the world. But that father had slowly disappeared over the past few years, replaced by a man who allowed his wife to control every aspect of his life, including his relationship with his daughter. The bridesmaids were chatting among themselves, but Lucy couldn't bring herself to join in. She felt a sense of betrayal that was too heavy to bear. The people who had never wavered in their loyalty to her were here, but the one person who should have been here, the one who was supposed to be there when it mattered most. Jake found her in the quiet moment before the ceremony started. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft but concerned. Lucy forced a smile. "I'm fine." Jake didn't buy it. He gently turned her to face him. "Lucy, you know you don't have to hide this from me. If you need to talk about it, we can—" "I just want it to be over," she interrupted, her voice shaky. "I want to walk down that aisle and marry you. I want to forget about everything else." Jake nodded. "I get it. But just know that I'm here, no matter what happens today." Her eyes softened as she looked up at him. "I know. I'm lucky to have you." The ceremony began shortly after. The small chapel was filled with friends and distant relatives who had arrived despite the rumors. They were there for Lucy, and that was what mattered now. As the music started, Lucy felt the familiar rush of emotions flood her body. The soft sound of the violin filled the space, and she felt a tear slip down her cheek as she stood at the threshold of the aisle. She had always imagined this moment differently. Her father standing at her side, pride in his eyes. But instead, she was walking alone. And as she stepped forward, with every step closer to Jake, the sting in her chest lessened. She was still going to marry the man she loved. She was still going to start a new life with him, despite the shadows that loomed over her from her past. The ceremony was beautiful. Every word spoken felt genuine, and Jake's vows made her heart swell with happiness. She could feel the love in the air as they exchanged their promises to each other. It wasn't the wedding she had planned, but it was the one she needed. As the officiant declared them husband and wife, Lucy smiled, though her eyes were wet with unshed tears. The kiss that followed felt like a new beginning, one where she didn't have to carry the burden of her father's absence anymore. After the ceremony, the reception was held in the hall next to the chapel. Lucy smiled through the formalities, trying to focus on the joy that surrounded her. She danced with her friends, laughed at the speeches, and shared countless moments with the people who truly mattered in her life. But even amid all the celebration, her father's absence was impossible to ignore. Just as she was starting to feel the exhaustion of the day settle in, she heard a voice behind her that sent a chill down her spine. "Excuse me, Lucy." She turned around, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the doorway of the reception hall, was her father, Richard. His face was lined with regret, his eyes holding an apology that he had never been able to voice. Beside him, looking smug and defiant, was Linda. For a long moment, Lucy just stood there, unsure of what to do. Her father had come, finally, but had he come for her, or had Linda insisted? Was he here because he wanted to be, or because he had been forced into it? Her heart raced, her emotions tangled in a confusing knot. She wanted to run to him, to throw herself into his arms and ask him where he had been. But she knew that if she did, it wouldn't erase the years of silence, the years of being shut out. Instead, she took a deep breath and walked toward him. She didn't need to act out of anger or resentment anymore. Today wasn't about the past. It was about the future. And the future was with Jake. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice shaky but steady. "You came." Richard opened his arms, and for a moment, Lucy felt the warmth of the father she had once known. She stepped into his embrace, her body shaking with the relief of feeling his arms around her once more. "I'm so sorry, Lucy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I made a mistake. I let her get in my head, and I lost sight of what mattered." Lucy pulled back, looking up at him, searching his eyes for the truth. "Why now? Why didn't you come sooner?" He looked at Linda, his face filled with a sadness that Lucy couldn't quite place. "I don't know. She's very persuasive, but I should have seen through it. I should have known better." Linda stood behind him, her arms crossed, her lips pursed. She didn't speak, but the look she gave Lucy was one of complete disdain. Lucy ignored her, choosing to focus on her father instead. "I'm glad you're here," Lucy said, her voice quieter now. "But it's not enough to just show up. I need you to choose me, Dad. I need you to stand by me, not just when it's convenient." Richard's face faltered for a moment, then he nodded. "I understand. I've been a fool." Lucy wasn't sure if this was a turning point or just a fleeting moment of guilt on her father's part, but for the first time in years she felt like she had a chance. "I'm still your daughter," Lucy said, her voice firm. "But I won't let anyone come between me and my happiness anymore. Not even you." He looked at her with a new understanding, the weight of his own mistakes sinking in. "I'm sorry, Lucy. I don't deserve to be here, but I want to try. I want to be part of your life again." Lucy nodded slowly, a sense of cautious hope blooming in her chest. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the resolution she had dreamed of, but it was a start. The night went on, and Lucy found herself surrounded by love. Her friends danced with her, celebrated with her, and reminded her of everything she had gained. Not just today, but throughout her life. She had Jake by her side, and though her relationship with her father was still strained, there was a flicker of hope that it could be repaired. When the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Lucy stood at the doorway with Jake, watching the last of the cars drive off. Her father had gone home with Linda, but the conversation they'd had was enough for now. Lucy had been through a lot to get to this point, and as she stood there arm in arm with the man she loved, she realized that she was stronger than she'd ever known. "Are you happy?" Jake asked softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. Lucy turned to him, her heart full. "I am. I really am." The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was finally free. Free from Linda's control, free from the years of manipulation, and free to move forward, with or without her father's full support. She was no longer defined by the past, and that was the most important thing of all. As the last traces of the day slipped away, Lucy kissed Jake softly, knowing that no matter what came next, she had already won. She had found her peace.